Advances in biotechnology have triggered a great deal of philosophical and scientific thought about death. Also, fear of death is an important motivational impulse for what people do. If we don't consider the role that such concerns play in human lives, our explanations of moral judgment and behavior will very likely remain partial. We think about death in different circumstances and for different purposes. Some of them are theoretical, other practical, and other purely personal or existential. Reflecting on the nature of death and on the criteria for someone being declared dead are different things. Very generally put, death is life's ending. So, to clarify the definition of death, one needs to think and say something about the nature of life. Not easy to do. And ask, for instance, whether life can be suspended or restored, and how it relates to our continued existence. But even a specific definition of the concept of death will be different from the criteria by which death can be detected. A definition is an account of what death is. So when and only when its definition is met, death has necessarily occurred. A criterion for death, by contrast, lays out conditions by which all and only actual death can be readily identified. Such a criterion will fall short of a definition, but still can play a practical role. For example, it would help physicians and jurists determine when death has occurred. This short lecture will look into some arguments about the legalization of physician-assisted death. So a good starting place is to consider what are some of the criteria used by physicians to determine death. In the United States, the criteria for death are modeled on the Uniform Determination of Death Act, according to which an individual who has sustained either irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions or irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brainstem, is declared dead. A determination of death must be made in accordance with accepted medical standards. So in the United Kingdom, the accepted criterion is brainstem death, or the permanent functional death of the brainstem. All of these current criteria for determining death can be subjected to criticism. For instance, some might resist the criteria since the vital processes of human beings, whose entire brains have ceased to function, can be sustained artificially using cardiopulmonary assistance. Or others might object to these criteria on grounds that minds and all psychological features can be destroyed in human beings whose brainstems are intact. For example, cerebral death can leave its victim with an intact brainstem, yet mindless and devoid of self-awareness. Both the ways in which we define death and the criteria we use to establish if someone is dead are relevant in debates about physician-assisted death. In particular, the features of the definition of the concept of death which are relevant in debates about physician-assisted death cover how the concept of death is linked to the idea of the intrinsic value of life, whether death necessarily involves harm or not, who takes the moral responsibility for the decision of how to die, and what role do quality of life judgments play in moral decision-making about death. So, let us look into the concept of assisted death itself. One can talk about assisted suicide or assisted death, which involves the case when one kills oneself with the assistance of people who know they are helping you to this end. Physician-assisted suicide, or physician-assisted death, PAD, occurs when a qualified physician is helping someone end their life, typically by prescribing a lethal dose of a drug. Then voluntary PAD, or euthanasia, is being killed by others at your own request. Non-voluntary PAD, or euthanasia, is being killed by others despite your inability to express a view on whether or not you want to die because your quality of life is unacceptably low. Euthanasia is illegal in most countries, although doctors do sometimes will carry it out even where it is illegal. voluntary euthanasia, or physician-assisted death, became legal in the Netherlands, Switzerland, Belgium, Luxembourg, 9 states in the US, 2 states in Australia, and Canada. It is still outlawed in the UK, but those involved are not being prosecuted. There are 5 conditions that are often proposed as necessary for candidacy for physician-assisted death. 1. The person is suffering from a terminal illness. 2. The person is unlikely to benefit from the discovery of a cure for that illness during what remains of her life expectancy. 3. The person is, as a direct result of the illness, either suffering intolerable pain or only has available a life that is unacceptably burdensome, for instance, because the illness has to be treated in ways that lead to her being unacceptably dependent on others or on technological means of life support. 4. The person has an enduring, voluntary, and competent wish to die, or has, prior to losing the competence to do so, expressed the wish to be assisted to die in the event that conditions 1 to 3 are satisfied. And 5. The person is unable without assistance to end her life. If these conditions are met, it is argued that there should be legal and medical provisions to facilitate that the person in question is allowed to die or assisted to die. There aren't many positive arguments for physician-assisted death in the bioethical literature, but we can identify 2 ethical considerations that are often used in support of voluntary euthanasia. The first one. It is said that respect for persons demands respect for their autonomous choices as long as those choices do not result in harm to others. So respect for people's autonomous choices is directly connected with the requirement for competence because autonomy presupposes competence. In exercising autonomy or self-determination, individuals take responsibility for their lives. Since dying can be seen as a part of life, choices about the manner of their dying and the timing of their death are for many people part of what is involved in taking responsibility for their lives. People may be concerned about what the last phase of their lives will be like, not merely because of fears that their dying might involve them in great suffering, but also because of the desire to retain their dignity and as much control over their lives as possible during this phase. Then, there is the fact that promoting well-being of persons seems to be morally important for many people. So when someone is suffering intolerable pain or only has available a life that is unacceptably burdensome, and they competently request medical assistance with dying, their well-being may be best promoted by affording them that assistance. The second ethical consideration concerns the importance of promoting the well-being of persons. When someone is suffering intolerable pain or only has available a life that is unacceptably burdensome, and they competently request medical assistance with dying, their well-being may be best promoted by affording them that assistance. A stronger argument in favor of legalizing physician-assisted death has been made by philosopher Peter Singer. He argued both for the moral and legal permissibility of non-voluntary euthanasia or physician-assisted death. Singer argues that in light of biotechnological development, one can establish that the lives of those whose higher brains have stopped functioning are not worth living, and that it is morally acceptable to kill them. Killing such people, he argues, would free organs for transplant, hospital beds for others, so it would increase the greatest happiness for the greatest number. According to Singer, we only refuse to consider intentionally killing such people because we are trapped in a way of thinking about lives being intrinsically valuable, whatever its quality. But this, he insists, is wrong. It is morally and therefore should be legally permissible to kill anyone who has irreversibly lost consciousness. bulk of the arguments in debates about physician-assisted death comprises a series of consequentialist arguments against the legalization of physician-assisted death. Some of the most common arguments against the legalization of the practice take the shape of a slippery slope argument. For instance, the slippery slope argument to involuntary euthanasia. According to this line of thought, if we legalize physician-assisted death, we'll start down the slippery slope to non-voluntary euthanasia, and eventually we'll end up with a social policy endorsing involuntary euthanasia. A similar argument is the increasing abuses of the law argument. So, patients might be pressured by family members or insurance companies to seek PAD. Similarly, vulnerable groups, the elderly, minorities, and the poor, will be more likely to apply for PAD due to discrimination and pressure from different social groups. Also, this argument claims that people without insurance will request PAD because they won't see that they have other options. Another type of consequentialist argument claims that the legalization of PAD will corrupt medicine and its practitioners, and so on. All of these arguments are versions of the slippery slope type of arguments. So, we can respond to them generally by pointing out that slippery slope arguments are typically fallacious, unless one can show that there is a good reason to think that taking the first step will actually lead to all of the alleged remaining steps. A more important problem with slippery slope arguments is that the predictions of the consequentialist arguments I mentioned earlier are not borne out by the available data. So, remember the first argument, the fact that there is a slippery slope from legalizing PAD to making involuntary euthanasia legal. This question we should ask about the slippery slope argument to involuntary euthanasia is whether there is evidence that the legalization of PAD will lead to an increase of cases of non-voluntary and even involuntary euthanasia. A 2003 study of end-of-life decisions in 6 European countries revealed that non-voluntary euthanasia was encountered in countries where PAD was illegal. The incidence of non-voluntary euthanasia in countries like the Netherlands, where PAD is legal, is not higher than in other countries, and there seems to be a decreasing trend. As there is no evidence supporting the claim that the legalization of PAD leads to an increase in cases of non-voluntary or involuntary euthanasia, the slippery slope argument does not provide a convincing reason against legalizing PAD. Take the second slippery slope argument, according to which legalizing PAD will lead to increasing abuses of the law. Again, the statistical data available from a number of studies doesn't support the prediction that legalizing PAD will increase the incidence of abuses of the law. Although these abuses can take different forms, there is no evidence that more vulnerable categories of people will feel pressured to apply for PAD, or that external, for instance, family pressures will compel more people to consider PAD preferable to available palliative care. Finally, in response to the third consequentialist argument, states that have decided to make voluntary PAD legal have also invested in improving the available palliative and terminal care provisions. So, the slippery slope argument concerning the corruption of medical practitioners doesn't seem to get off the ground. Another different critique of physician-assisted death has been articulated by Susan Wolf. In a feminist critique of physician-assisted suicide, she argues that due to cultural ideology, socialization, and sexism, the practice of PAD is gendered. Women may be harmed by PAD in ways that men wouldn't. She identifies 3 gender effects of PAD. 1. Women would seek PAD more often than men. 2. Women will have different reasons for seeking PAD than men have. This, she says, is because women are less likely to receive adequate pain relief. They have a higher rate of depression and are more likely than men to be poor and are more likely than men to lack health insurance. Also, women have been socialized to be self-sacrificing. 3. Gender shapes the decisions that physicians make regarding PAD, in the sense that when a female patient requests PAD, physicians will be more likely to grant her request than they will a similar request made by a male. Susan Wolf mentions 2 reasons for this claim. 1. In granting women's requests for PAD, physicians will be, according to her, affirming women's negative self-judgments. And 2. The psychological dynamics between male physician and female patient may make the physician more likely to grant the request. These dynamics may be a complex combination of rescue fantasies and the desire to annihilate. In response, we must point out that the available data gathered on patients who have sought PAD does not support the prediction that women apply for it more often than men. Also, in response to the second point, while some of the reasons why people seek PAD are harder to assess, such as depression or self-sacrificing attitude, again, available data goes against the prediction that poor women lacking health insurance are more likely to seek PAD. Note that this is compatible with the fact that more poor women are dying due to a lack of access to palliative care and health insurance in general. The point of the data is about women seeking PAD. Finally, if physicians are more likely to grant a woman's request for PAD, then we would expect more women who requested PAD to be given the prescription than men who requested it. But again, this prediction is not confirmed by the available data. So Wolf's critique points out that gender socialization and sexism play an important role in determining the choices women make in our culture. As the choice to end one's life is final, we should want to make certain that autonomous consent is present. However, her feminist critique does not support a wholesale ban on physician-assisted death. There's another host of arguments that's raised against the legalization of PAD, and these are the deontological arguments. 2 of the most common deontological arguments against physician-assisted death refer to the physician's intent and the inherent wrongness of killing. Let's look at each of the deontological arguments in turn. The physician's intent argument. The core idea of this argument is that the intention of a physician should never be to kill. The intent should always be to cure. So, the Hippocratic Oath should forbid PAD because PAD is wrong insofar as it involves the physician's intent to kill a patient. However, in response, we can point out that in the case of physician-assisted death, the possibility of healing the patient is no longer available to the physician. So, the primary intent of the physician in such cases should be to ease the patient's suffering, to do what is in the best interest of the patient, or to respect the patient's autonomy. To say that the physician's intent in PAD is to kill the patient is to misrepresent their intentions. What about the second deontological argument, the inherent wrongness of killing argument? This can take the shape of a religious argument, killing is against God's will, or interpreted in naturalistic terms, the natural goal of surviving. Every human being has a natural inclination to continue living. While the religious argument is not accepted by everyone, the secular argument is fallacious because it does not apply to the case of those who seek and are granted the right to PAD. They are terminally ill and survival just is not possible. They want to end their lives in the way that they see fit, not lingering on in tremendous pain often, as nature would have it. So, as a general response, we might say that it is true that most cases of killing innocents are wrong, but there is an important disanalogy between these cases and the context in which PAD is sought and offered. Death is not desired or imminent in most cases of killing innocents. Physician-assisted death differs from wrongful killings because, according to existing regulation, the patient has to request the lethal medication. They are terminally ill with less than 6 months to live, and they think that death would be better than the life they are living. In short, death is not seen as a harm to those who seek and are granted physician-assisted death. To wrap up, positive arguments for physician-assisted death might not be compelling for everyone because not all of us have the same religious, moral, and philosophical ideas about death and its relation to life. On the other hand, if none of the arguments against PAD are strong enough, conceptually and empirically, then we have no strong reason to oppose the legalization of PAD. I pointed out that consequentialist arguments against the legalization of PAD make predictions which are not borne out by the data gathered in both regional and cross-national studies. The feminist argument against regulating PAD point out important gender defects, but their negative predictions concerning the effects of legal PAD practices are not supported by the available evidence. And finally, the ontological arguments fall short of taking into account the specific circumstances in which people seek and are granted the right to physician-assisted death.